Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter, BeaversEdge writer TJ Mathewson here on the Edge podcast. We're back following Oregon State's 38-10 win over California to push the record to 7-3 overall in the season. Oregon State has 2 games remaining in the regular season, a matchup on the road with Arizona State this weekend. We'll obviously be getting into it before the Oregon State-Oregon game. The following week, rivalry week, and a lot on the line potentially in that game as well. And then obviously the postseason. So happy to bring you all another edition of the podcast. Again, Brenden Slaughter joined by TJ Mathewson, writer and KAGO radio extraordinaire. What's going on, man? How are you?
I think you left one thing out with my title.
What was that?
One thing. Arizona State alum.
Oh, yes. I suppose we have to give TJ his moment in the sun during this week of the podcast.
This is the TJ week. This
Yes.
is the TJ week up here in Corvallis. And really interesting of the team I cover versus the school I went to. So, you don't have to ever worry about that, Brenden, with graduating from OSU, but I don't have that distinction. So I get to balance it out a little bit. Of course, I am as objective as they come. They label me as the objective one. So we'll see. Well, there's a lot to dive into in Tempe. It's a very intriguing matchup, I think, and really tough whenever a Northwest school goes down there to play. Always tough.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a great matchup, and obviously we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of it, the potential for it to be a trap game. We've obviously started our progress and research into Arizona State, as has the Beavers, and we'll be bringing you guys more content at BeaversEdge.com in the coming days. Obviously, closer look at Arizona State. We caught up with Arizona State's rival side as well to get a little bit more insight on the Sun Devils. So make sure to keep it locked to Beavers Edge for all the latest. But TJ, let's start by talking about the win over Cal. Obviously, a massive win. Oregon State bounces back after the loss to Washington, and, likely the best way possible, just in the sense that the team itself was, firing on all cylinders. Jonathan Smith called it, close to a complete game. This was very famously the press conference this week when he didn't really state that there was a whole lot to fix and, kind of improve upon. He was very pleased. And, when looking at the overall result, I mean, there's a lot of stats to love about it. We talked about it in our stories, whether it's the 9 rushing yards for Cal, Oregon State's defense holding Cal to really 3 points when you take away the scoop and score fumble. Obviously, some things to nitpick, of course, as there is in every single victory. But for the most part, TJ, exactly what you wanted to see from the Beavers following that Washington game that really seemed to drain the life out of the team.
And you would have never guessed that Washington game happened if you watched Saturday's game. I mean, it really was a snoozer. I mean,
it's true.
We're sitting next to each other in the press box. By the time the third quarter comes around, I'm just like, I mean, you can tell they're going to win the game.
Right.
So it's like your focus on the game really isn't as much. And I don't know, just overall looking at the game, I mean, even against a strong run defense, the Beavers still were able to run the ball really well with Damian Martinez. He got over 100 yards again. He's going to face a really crummy rush defense this Saturday in Tempe. So he has a chance to go for, I was joking on our post-game call-in show here at the station that he might go over 200 yards on Saturday. We'll have to see. They'll have to play the game. But I think a good opportunity for Damian to get a lot of yards on Saturday, especially with the injuries behind him. Deshaun Fenwick didn't play. Jam Griffin left with an injury. His status is unknown for Saturday right now. So on the Damian front, good. On the defensive front, under 10 yards rushing, always impressive. And, we hear a lot about Jaden Ott all week leading up to that. And Jaden Ott did nothing. He did absolutely nothing. He had no room to run. The Cal offensive line couldn't block for him. Jack Plummer looked frustrated and confused all game. Led to Bill Musgrave getting fired on Sunday. So that's how good of a defensive performance Oregon State had. And then we get to Ben. I thought Ben was fine again. 15 of 23 for 137 and a couple of touchdowns. He was fine again. I'm still not he played a better second half than the first half, I thought. I heard a lot more praise from other people praising his second half. I'm not quite sure if I'm at that point watching Ben, hoping against the worst pass defense in the conference to see a little bit more. And I didn't see it. it. And it's still his first season. He's still progressing, but I just don't know if that progression is there for what I wanted to see out of Ben. And they still scored 38 points. Think about all that.
Right.
Still scored 38 points. So be all end all, not the end of the world, but that is something that is fine against a Cal, and maybe it'll be fine against an ASU this coming weekend. But if Bo Nix is healthy in 2 weeks, that's an issue, I think. So if that's the
Right.
one nitpick I'm going to have, and it's kind of unfair to just nitpick one guy, but the quarterback's the
Right.
most important position on the field.
It is.
And it's just not seeing it yet. Not really.
I honestly really good points all the way around, and a couple points I want to make to your points, but kind of starting off, like you said, the Oregon State defense, I thought this was one of their better games of the year. Again, if you take away that scoop and score fumble, it's 3 points, right? And I think when you kind of consider that, you consider the 9 rushing yards, and I think all that kind of considered really seems to kind of emphasize that defense is incredibly tough to beat at home. It took a last minute, Caleb Williams, I shouldn't even say last minute, a 4th and 14 or 4th and whatever it was, push from,
Bush
Caleb
push.
Williams. Yeah, from Caleb Williams and the Trojans, just to put themselves in a position to sneak that one out at Reeser. Otherwise, the Beavers have been dynamite there. So I think, that continues to be a great development, especially going into the Oregon game. Second thing you mentioned, if Bo Nix is healthy, I've heard that's the key word.
Yeah.
I have no sources or anything, but if is the key word. So I think
and they're not one to leak out any information. Remember, Oregon did not name Bo Nix their starting quarterback until he trotted out in the first series against Georgia.
Right. So yeah, I mean, that obviously is going to be something like a tertiary storyline to keep an eye on this weekend. If your Oregon State is whether or not he's able to go against Utah and so on, but enough on them. This is not about them. This is back to Oregon State.
Right.
I have to make a little joke, TJ. Obviously, you mentioned Bill Musgrave getting let go. Do you think Bill Musgrave just said, all right, I'll just hang here in Oregon? My nephew's, here on the team, most of the family. He might have just not gone back to Berkeley, right?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. You'd have to ask him. He's free now. He's got all the time in the world to answer your phone calls.
No, it was just it was too coincidental, following, all the connections that there were in that game with, Cal, staff members and so on and so forth. So obviously their shakeup definitely emphasized in that game how dominant Oregon State was on that side of the ball, and, kind of because Cal is at that point in their season. But to your points on Ben, I would definitely agree all the way around. I think we saw what Ben can do with a comfortable environment, no weather conditions, other than being cold, of course, and, a crowd that's behind him, as opposed to, some of the times where maybe, Ben didn't look great. Like I'm thinking back to the Stanford game early this year when, at times his pocket presence, was left something to be desired. He obviously made the play at the end of the game, so kudos there. And then, against Washington, I thought he played better. Like he's progressively gotten better, TJ. The thing is, it's just not like huge, like one game to the next, this guy's making just leaps and bounds. It's little bits here and there. And while it can be frustrating, you still have to, look at the fact that, his record as a starter, the fact that he has kind of game managed, for lack of a better term, the offense to a few wins now. And, I think it's fair to assume at this point, we probably won't see anybody else at quarterback this year. I'm not going to say for sure the bowl game could be a ways out, but at this point, it's probably Ben or bust, for lack of better terms. And, I say that probably because who knows, Chance Nolan could return. Jonathan Smith got asked about it after Cal and didn't even rule it out. But at this point, I'm a little skeptical myself. Ben probably finishes the year out, I think.
That's probably a good assumption. And I just, the reason it comes to Ben is because we hear it so much on the Joe Beaver show during the week and on the Collins show after the game that the Beavers very much could be the best team in the Pac-12 if they had good quarterback play. I mean, I don't even know if that's a question. Like they could be. They would be 9-1 right now.
There's a case to be made.
If they had good quarterback play, they'd be 9-1 right now, with the wins over USC and wins over Washington as well.
Probably.
But because your quarterback let you down in both of those games, you're sitting here at 7-3. And I think that's just where a lot of the frustration comes from, that the roster is good enough to win a Pac-12 championship, but the quarterback position
Right.
is not. And I don't even think that's really a bold exclamation in a Pac-12 that is as good as it's been in probably a decade. The rankings
Right.
came out yesterday, and there are 6
Yeah.
Pac-12 teams in the top 25. When was the last, like, I think the last time that happened was 2016,
Oof,
and there's
wow.
more teams ranked in the
Yeah.
Pac-12 than there are in the SEC. I mean, okay. I mean, the SEC is Georgia, but then after
Right.
that, I mean, the Pac-12 has just this clump of schools
Right.
right there in the top 25 with all the best teams in the country.
Right. And I think that's a key point. And that's going to be the biggest what if of this season, TJ, outside of what if Luke Musgrave stayed healthy, and what if, I guess you can kind of loop what if Chance Nolan was healthy into that kind of mix. And, who knows if Chance Nolan would have provided the play ultimately that you're talking about, because, you think about it, when Chance Nolan left, I mean, it was Oregon State was technically still in that game with Utah. So, you couldn't say that like your Pac-12 title hopes were dashed then. So I think there'll be a lot of what ifs, and on that same margin, you could have gone the other way, TJ, and been like, the injury happened. What if Ben wasn't good enough to shepherd you to as many wins, or you didn't have a quarterback on the roster? I mean, what if Oregon State, like on the other side, went 2-3 in those 5 games? Granted, I don't think the rest of the roster was going to let you down, but to an extent, I think Ben did as good as he probably could under the circumstances and his comfort level, current talent level, current awareness as being QB1. Again, I think the kid has a ton of potential, though, but he's young and he's still kind of learning the ropes, as where Chance Nolan, has been playing since 2020. So very similarly to when Tristan Gebbia got hurt and Chance Nolan was thrown into the mix in the 2020 season, and Chance Nolan kind of had some up and down games to finish up that year, and then into the next year, obviously much different stories. So I think quarterback will probably be the biggest what if with this team, TJ. But I think when looking at that, you also have to look on the other side and go, how many other teams as backups would take them to the record that Ben has?
Well, it probably depends on the team you're talking about. Cam Rising was the backup for Utah last year, and he almost won them a Rose Bowl.
Fair point.
So,
fair point. I guess
Charlie
it's
Brewer was the
circumstantial.
starter at Utah at the beginning of last year. People forget that.
Yeah, truly circumstantial. You're right. That's fair. But it's definitely one of those things that I think we'll look back upon once the season's all said and done, and kind of nitpick it for now. But in terms of what they have in front of them, and also putting a bow tie on that Cal game, TJ, I think Oregon State played one of their better games. It was the performance, that you would expect. But now the challenge becomes Arizona State and the final road game. And I'm sure, you and I will talk about it, but outside of a few moments here and there, the Beavers are a far different team away from Reser Stadium. And, we saw moments of that in the Washington game, moments of that, in the Stanford game, even though they won that game, moments of that, at Fresno State. I mean, every road game. So I think this is a big challenge and a huge opportunity for Oregon State to, play well on the road and take one of their signature performances on the road against a team that, on paper at least, you should be able to have a lot of success with. I agree with Jonathan Smith earlier in the week when he called ASU dangerous. I think they are more dangerous than your typical, sub 500 team, because I do think Herm Edwards, long gone, RIP, did manage to stack up some talent there. I don't think this is one of those talent devoid teams that's floundering. I'm maybe looking slightly at some teams in the Pac-12 in recent years, but it's, I don't think Arizona State's that. I just think it was kind of a mess, and this mess of a season is crescendoing into, it ending and them ultimately hiring a new coach, a new staff, all that. They got 2 games left, and who knows what to expect from Arizona State, right?
Yeah, I don't know. The interim coaching staff has been fine. I know the defensive coordinator, Donnie Henderson, was trying to endorse Sean Aguano for the head coaching position Now it was announced last week, which I'm sure they would have had a search firm hired for a while now, that they have hired a search firm to hire their head coach. So they're thinking
Right.
about that. And I would guess as soon as the Territorial Cup is over a week from Friday, I believe that's when they play it. I think it's Friday.
Yeah.
That they'll probably have a new coach probably by midweek the next week, because remember, signing day is in December, and they
Yes.
want a new coach in there by December. So that's something to think about. But to Arizona State, as you mentioned, not devoid of talent. I mean, the Sun Devils, when I was there at school, and even now when the roster is kind of devoid, we're gonna kind of list off some guys that left their roster, but they're not, skill positions are never usually an issue
Right.
for the Sun Devils. Even in a down year this year, their running back X Valade has been one of the best running backs in the country.
Very
Transfer from
talented.
Wyoming. Wide receiver Elijah Badger is a great athlete. Herm would always hype that guy up. Oh, we just got to get him in. We're waiting for that guy to get the opportunity. And this year,
Yeah.
finally, he's got some consistent playing time, and he's been, he's a very talented wide receiver. And then since I'll bring up this point now because I was going to bring it up anyway. So they switched play callers about midway through the interim stint. Sean Aguano took over the play calling duties, and they've been emphasizing the tight ends a little bit more. And a former 4-star recruit tight end, Jalen Conyers, has really stepped in. He scored 4 touchdowns in 3 weeks since that.
Yeah.
And he's projected to be a pretty good pro prospect as a tight end. So again, the skill positions are good. They're always very good at ASU, and I'd be curious to see whatever the next coach would recruit as for that position. So just a whole number of things. It is a bit of a mess of a coaching staff down there that'll sort of get fleshed out here in the next couple of weeks. But it's not like there's not talent remaining on the roster. A lot left, but there were some that stayed.
Right. And, just because it has some interest here, TJ, I think it's worth noting that, I mean, again, it's early, but what would you say Oregon offensive coordinator Kenny Dillingham, probably the leader in that clubhouse right now?
Well, it just seems like the fit from everything they said. They said they want someone young. It said they said they want someone probably offensive minded, because that's how college football leans. Kenny Dillingham graduated from ASU in 2012. He was an assistant coach there in 2014 and 2015. Previously, he had coached high school football in the Valley, I think from 2007. I didn't know this. He actually started coaching high school football when he was a senior in high school.
Yeah,
and then
I didn't know
coached
about that.
throughout college as well. I did not realize that.
Yeah.
And then it just seems like a good fit. He's here on the West Coast, an ASU grad, someone that you would hope be loyal to the program. So I would imagine he's going to be on their list. There's a whole bunch of other names. I wrote down. You want to hear some names I wrote down from all the other all the other suggestions? Let's see. Arizona Republic suggested Tom Herman, Vance Joseph, Urban Meyer, Bob Stoops, Dan Mullen. CBS Sports added Matt Rule, Byron Leftwich, Todd Monken, Hugh Freeze, Brian Harsin, Deion Sanders, Mike Norvell, Justin Wilcox, Rick Neuheisel. ESPN suggested Jonathan Smith, for all the people who want to get a good chuckle at that.
Yeah, no, that ain't happening.
That ain't happening. Et cetera. There's there's a lot of options. Marcus Arroyo, Cliff Kingsbury, it's got thrown around.
Hey, I mean, for what it's worth, TJ, of all those names, Cliff might be available at the end of the season, so you never know.
Yeah,
but I don't think ASU.
Well, he got extended.
Oh,
he got extended. Remember?
Yeah,
that might be tough. I don't think ASU would buy him out of that contract.
No, but all jokes aside, the only reason I brought it up is because I think it could stand to, hurt Oregon a little bit, and losing what I think is a bright young offensive coordinator. Or those
as an alum, I think as an alum and not working a part of the search firm, I think it should be Kenny Dillingham, but I don't make the decisions. It is different than what ASU did last time. ASU did not hire a search firm when they hired Herm Edwards, as you could probably guess. Ray Anderson, early in that 2017 season, before he hired Todd Graham, had already made up his mind that he was going to hire Herm from ESPN to be his next head coach. So a different process this time.
Yeah, definitely going to be interesting. But back to how it affects this game specifically this weekend, TJ. Where do you think Arizona State's mindset is as far as the bowl game is done for that? I kind of want to examine their threat scale as far as being able to put a scare into the Beavers because on paper, you look at it and, you said you had some stats. Obviously, the rush yards allowed is the one that stands up and is big. But on paper, this is a game Oregon State should win. However, and,
Right.
the spread is 8 right now. That's a pretty good spread for a team like Oregon State that's on the rise still as a program on the road. And the Beavers haven't really, necessarily proven to be road warriors, I should say. They've gotten some wins, but, it's still been an area they're trying to gain that consistency. So I'm kind of curious where you think their mindset might be in this one, TJ, as far as, do they have anything left to play for when you know that the guy who's there? I mean, I think back to Oregon State situation in 2017, and got to preface this by saying there were some good dudes on that team, some good guys that I knew well. However, towards the end of the year, they packed it in, and it was extremely packed in at Autzen Stadium when they lost 69-10 and were getting into, brouhahas on the sideline with each other and so on and so forth. So I know what it's like for, or I've seen up close what it's like when a team with an interim coach, things aren't necessarily going well, shutting it down and just kind of packing it in, packing the gear in and, 1, 2, 3, Cancun, as they say. But as far as Arizona State specifically, TJ, the fact that they're 3-7 and found a little bit more success under Sean Aguano compared to, like, for instance, Oregon State did. Oregon State didn't win a game under their interim coach. I feel like Sean Aguano maybe has the respect of Arizona State's players to keep them as a dangerous team entering this game with Oregon State. Do you kind of get the same vibe? It's like you said,
Right.
the talent is there. There's some skill position players, and if Oregon State doesn't bring what I'm going to say a B effort, and just for the record, I think it was like, somewhere between a C against Stanford until the fourth quarter when they turned it on. This is a team that I feel like Oregon State needs to do the same thing they did against Cal, TJ, like 21-0 before you even blink.
Yeah, I mean, yes, because that's probably the difference in level these two teams would play if they were playing here at Reeser again. But it's a different animal, and these guys are playing on the road. So it's going to be senior day down there, and then there's one more game after that, the Territorial Cup. Everything's out the window, especially because the two teams are pretty evenly matched, aka two very awful defenses. So that would be that'd be an entertaining matchup. But for senior night again, I just not down there as much, but I wouldn't put it past them. I wouldn't, because I remember what the point I was going to make. So when Herm was let go, there was this almost sigh of relief within the program that there would finally be some structure to the team, because it didn't seem like there was much when Herm was there, to be honest.
Right.
When everything was going down and there's all the NCAA infractions and all the other news coming out, that there wasn't as much structure, and that there was sort of this relief when he got let go. Okay, we can operate like a football team. And while the win-loss record hasn't represented it, I think the win-loss record is probably a little bit more of a representation of the amount of talent that left the roster in the offseason. I have 13 guys written down. I was talking to Mike Parker on Monday, and he said he has 20. He listed 20 guys that had left off the roster. That's a good chunk. And a lot of them were starters, and a lot of them are playing very well elsewhere.
Yep, agreed.
So, I know the guys do like respect Iguano, but I to be honest, in terms of packing it in, you're probably asking the wrong guy. I'm not sure. There's one thing I do know, Brenden, is that teams in the Pacific Northwest do not play well down in Tempe. I wrote down the records by year of Pacific Northwest teams in Arizona. Doesn't matter the time of year, just period, playing in Tempe. Yeah. This year, 0-1, UW lost. That's the reason they're not in the playoff right now, is because they lost to ASU down in Tempe, and they lost to Trenton Bourget, who I think is supposed to be healthy this week. The quarterback for ASU, not Emory Jones. Wazoo was the only team to go down there last year. They beat ASU. And then in 2019, Washington State and Oregon State lost, Oregon lost down there. 2018, Oregon State lost down there. 2017, 5th ranked UW and 24th ranked Oregon lost down there. 2016, that was a bad ASU team. Wazoo went down there and won by 5. 2015, lost to Oregon in 3 overtimes and beat UW. 2014, Washington State lost down there. 2013, UW and Oregon State went down there and lost. And then 2012, they Washington State won Oregon won and Washington State lost. So teams I tallied it up 4-11 in the last 10 years down in Tempe are the Pacific Northwest teams. Doesn't matter the time of year. Doesn't matter the rankings. There are that's two top 6 teams that lost down there. Very good teams that lost to probably worse ASU teams. So got to keep that in mind, and something I'll be factoring into my prediction later.
No doubt. Well, taking that point and zeroing it down to Oregon State even more, TJ, Oregon State's won there once in 53 years.
Yeah.
Once.
That I didn't know until this week. That is a long time.
Once in 53 years. So, again, your stat adds even more context because now I know it's not just Oregon State. But when you think about that 2009, and, I was talking about it with Mike Parker earlier this week too, and, that 2009, game stands out. Oregon State played really well down there. Dennis Erickson was still down there for Arizona State and, hadn't had his – I'm trying to remember what that timeline was like, but wasn't a super great team that year, and Oregon State played well. Other than that,
Dennis didn't do quite as well at ASU as he did at Oregon State.
No, definitely no awesome BCS games and amazing greatest season ever for Jonathan Smith and company. But back to the point itself, I think it's going to be interesting. As far as how that all shakes out. And you also mentioned the quarterback situation. Do you think we'll see a change at quarterback? Like, as far as Jones versus, you said Bourquet? Is that how you say his last name?
Yeah, it's Bourquet.
Bourquet,
if Trenton Bourquet is healthy, I think he'll play.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. That's everything I can observe from my Twitter timeline. He would probably be the one.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, again, when catching up with, Arizona State, the site earlier this week, we were chit-chatting and kind of talking about how, it was Bourquet that played, pretty well against Washington and, was, a big part of the reason why they ended up winning that game. So, that's you mentioned that in your point as well, TJ, and I think that's worth mentioning too, just to kind of show, how impressive maybe Sean Aguano can have his team. They beat Washington. Tell me that win doesn't look all that more impressive in the last 2 weeks. So I think that fact alone is going to give Oregon State, a proper respect for Arizona State because they can simply look at their schedule and go, granted, it was, a month ago, but still a month ago, this Arizona State team beat Washington, who just beat you and then went into Autzen Stadium and beat the Ducks. So I think a proper amount of respect for Arizona State definitely needs to be given. But yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, if Oregon State, goes in there with that clear mind and state of mind, and then, like you said, they don't read into the things that us media are talking about, like 53 years, 1 win. That doesn't matter to this year's team, or those records are fun for us to talk about. But for the football players, they mean nothing. Every year is unique and different. And, while those streaks do add up, it's not like there's a curse or something along those lines. So it's definitely going to be interesting. It just shows that, like you said, maybe the focus factor isn't always there when you head down to sunny and warm Arizona when it's, as cold
and windy. There's a lot of distractions down there.
Yeah. TJ knows
a lot of distractions down there.
But the line itself, TJ, it's -8 for Oregon State. What do you think about that? And then kind of taking that a little bit further, what are kind of your keys to this game for Oregon State, and ultimately tease your prediction a little bit?
Well, the key for Oregon State is going to be getting on track on offense. They need a fast start. They can't be a slow start on the road. I mean, they had a fast start against Washington, but they couldn't, adjust throughout the game, and that really hurt them. And their offense went one-dimensional with Damian, and they got clogged up as the game went along. So it's going to be Damian early and often. Arizona State really can't stop the run. Their rushing defense is 99th nationally. They are terrible in red zone defense. They score 91% of the time. Their third down defense is near last in the whole country, 49% on defense. Yep. So the opportunity is there to really extend drives and keep the ASU defense on the field for a long time. And then for your defense, I mean, guys are like the best defense in the Pac-12. There's no reason for a 3-7
Yeah,
team to play well against you. I know they have good skill players, and hey, maybe they might make a play or
right.
two, score a touchdown here or there. But like, if this is a game where ASU comes out with like X-Vality and starts running all over the Beavers,
Yeah,
who had allowed 9 rushing yards to Cal this week, it's that's a focus thing.
right,
That's a discipline thing that they've shown they could do at home plenty often, but on the road, I mean, it's kind of hit or miss.
right.
So, it's on them. Like, they have the talent to win this game. They're the better team. They have been the better team all season. I don't see a reason why they shouldn't win this game. I will probably pick Oregon State, but I'm not sure yet. I haven't made up my mind.
Yeah, TJ's got that perfect prediction record on the line for those of you who have been
Yeah.
staying close with Beaver's Edge and reading our staff predictions each week, which, for first of all, if you're not, why aren't you reading our staff predictions every week? Why aren't you at Beaver's Edge all the time? It's a place to be if you're a Beaver fan. And not to mention, TJ writes some awesome predictions, as with Dylan and myself. But I'm curious, TJ, for you, kind of going into this game, like, you know, of all those things that you mentioned, what do you think is the most important? Because I've got a couple keys myself, but what do you think kind of stands above the rest?
For offense or defense?
Let's do one for both.
On offense, I keep saying I want to see Ben just like light it up.
Agreed.
But that's probably a
Agreed.
little bit too much to ask for. So, I mean, number one is Damian in the run game and the offensive line
Of
really
course.
establishing self. Might not be the healthiest group. There might be a couple backups in there starting on the line this week with the injuries to Tolly and to Bloomfield as well. I
Yep.
think is the other one who's hurt.
Yep. Yep.
So it'd be establishing a good line of scrimmage. Then on defense, I mean, don't let the quarterbacks beat you. They've been kind of underwhelming all season.
Yeah.
And again, Elijah Badger is a really good athlete. Tight end Jalen Conyer is really broken out since the Iguanos taken over the play calling.
Right.
X-Validays, a very talented skill player. But I just wouldn't want to let any, one guy on the outside or the quarterback beat you. I mean, that's kind of general. But, Arizona State's not really a team that does a whole lot extremely well. I mean, their passing offense is 44th. The rushing offense is 90th. Not necessarily efficient throwing down the field. So it's just like, not sure if there's one area really to circle
Right.
to stop, more as to just not let one guy really just go off and kill you all game.
Right. No, I think those are two really good points. And, kind of to piggyback off that myself, I think the biggest thing for me is kind of starting fast. And I think that can go on both sides because, like you said, I think whether they kick the ball to Arizona State first or get the ball offensively first, whether that's getting an initial 3-and-out and like stopping a couple runs, incomplete pass, something like that to get Arizona State off the field in like 3, maybe 6 plays or whatever it is, to where they're like, kind of already down after getting the ball a little bit kind of deflated. And then offensively, the quicker you can start and build up a lead, we've seen that's been the key to success for Oregon State and their wins this year. And then secondly, on both sides as well, you have to overcome injuries. And TJ, we didn't get a chance to run through the report, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that real quick just to kind of set the stage. So the good news from the Cal game, which Oregon State had a lot of guys out, is that no one suffered a season-ending injury. But kind of the other side of that coin is that there's a lot of guys that are questionable, and knowing how we've seen the Beavers approach injuries, probably a lot of guys that don't see action this weekend. No one's been ruled out. I want to preface by saying that, but this last weekend, Deshaun Fenwick, he was out. He was questionable for this week. Jam Griffin, as you mentioned, obviously left the Cal game with an injury. He's questionable for this week. John McCartan, questionable for this week. Jack Coletto suffered an injury against Cal. He's questionable. Definitely good news for Oregon State that he didn't suffer a season-ending injury, because he's, such a key to everything that you do. And we didn't get enough time in the podcast to really kind of zone in on Jack Coletto's impact. But I think that could be a huge factor in this game, TJ, because you think about how most of Oregon State short yardage Coletto packages essentially have to be thrown out if he's not there, because you don't have another Jack Coletto. And I know we said that earlier this year, but just because you don't have Luke Musgrave, you don't throw away every other tight end route. For Jack Coletto, that's maybe the unique aspect of what he does. You don't really have
Yep.
someone else practicing those sequences, those things. So that'll definitely be a key for me as well. You mentioned Haneli Bloomfield and Tully Squaga. I'd look for Tyler Morano and probably Tanner Miller to fill in there. They did this last weekend. And then finally, wrapping up with Alex Austin, Jaden Grant, a couple big-time playmakers in the secondary, both left the game against Cal, like Jonathan Smith said on Monday, questionable. So with all those injuries, TJ, it's going to be a lot for Oregon State to overcome, but potentially opportunities for some young guys and some of the depth to show out. I know particularly to kind of wrap this up, Blue Adams talked to you guys about the depth in the secondary on Wednesday, and he feels good about it.
Yeah, they really like what they saw. I think Skylar Thomas, Achille Arnold got in there.
Very good.
Ryan Cooper slid over and played outside. So that those are guys they're confident in. They see it every day in practice, and guys they have extreme confidence in. So I don't know if they perform up to the same level, and it would make you it would make you more nervous if you're going down there playing a bunch of backups who you don't trust out there in a stadium that you haven't won at one time in 53 years, and that teams from the Pacific Northwest really struggling. And are they focused? Are they ready? Are you looking forward to Oregon? I mean, these are all valid questions.
Right, and again, as TJ mentioned, distractions down there in the sun and the fun.
A lot of distractions. Speak from experience.
Yeah, lots of distractions for sure. And then, like you said, I think it's I think it's natural because I think it's just human instinct to potentially look ahead. Maybe there are some guys who are more in the here and now than maybe others, and I'm not speaking for anybody, but yeah, of course, it's human nature. You're looking ahead to the Oregon game next week, and I think that's all going to have to be something that Oregon State kind of pushes to the side because it is an important game. The opportunity to get 8 regular season wins going into the matchup with Oregon, I think is huge. It's something that hasn't been done at this program in many years, and Oregon State can't lose sight of that as they're trying to finish up this season. So I think it's going to be a really good game. Obviously make sure to tune in to BeaversEdge.com for the predictions. I'm leaning Oregon State right now as well. I think the Beavers will ultimately prevail, but I think it's going to be a lot tougher than those know. And I think that's why Vegas, TJ mentioned to me last week, Vegas doesn't seem to be wrong very often. And he's right because the spread's 8. I think that's right about where this game will end up. So again, make sure to tune back to BeaversEdge.com for TJ's prediction. Again, you got to put an undefeated streak on the line. Going to be exciting to read his, and also all the rest of our content. We'll have a closer look at Arizona State, our inside piece with the Arizona State publisher over at their rival site, and a whole bunch more content as well. So make sure to keep it locked to BeaversEdge.com. We'll be bringing you more coverage all the way through the leading you up to the Arizona State game, and then post-game coverage and preparing you for the Oregon game next week. TJ and I'll be back next week, preview the matchup against the Ducks at Reser Stadium to close out the 2022 season. Thanks again for watching the Edge Podcast.